How can I look at this chart and find out how hard it's going to thump?
You can look at that chart, and that's the best chart to look at to know what a camshaft's going to sound like.
Jump the shark up here, you get Evil Knievel Caesar's Palace landing down here. We call that valve bounce, and it's really bad.
So what are we looking at here?
All right, so these are the two camshafts. So you can see the original camshafts in blue. So that's the 4312 intake lobe. That's an RX intake lobe. A 4270 exhaust lobe. That's the RZ exhaust lobe. So this was probably one of the most successful early designs that I ever had a part of. So if you go back to this early 2000 era, a cam like this, 165 rocker on the intake, 1.5 on the exhaust, 108 lobe separation with those lobes, that would be really kind of the state of the art. That's what, if somebody wanted a baseline cam, that's what they would have had. So this is the intake over here, and this is the exhaust over here. So if you look at the intake opening, you can see this new design's a low shock design. So you can see the red line starts earlier, and then at the lash, then it's a little slower early, but then it accelerates really quickly through here around TDC. And if you compare this to an old, like if you look at an NHRA, say stock eliminator, those guys with the manual, they get a big heavy flywheel on them because they have like a 350 horsepower motor. They'll take a heavy flywheel and rev it up, get all this momentum stored, and then drop the clutch, and you see them pull the air, the tires in the air, and it looks like they're going to just take off, and they get out about 60 feet, and they're just kind of slow. Where you take an NHRA Pro mod where it has so much horsepower, and when it comes out, it comes out like an arrow. There's not a lot of up and down and everything like that. They're putting the power in slowly as they get moving. And that's exactly what this newer camshaft is like. It comes off a little slower, but then it can pour in the power later. Here at about 10 degrees after TDC, so here's TDC right here. Each of these is 30 degrees. So about 10 degrees after TDC is where the closest piston to valve is. So we have to be careful in this region to make sure that we don't run the valve into the piston. Lake's doing a special piston for this. We gave him this number, but we didn't want to carve it up a whole lot more, so we paid a lot of attention here. But all of this area, if you look from 30 degrees after all the way to 30 degrees after bottom dead center. And a lot of times I'll actually look at like 40 degrees after to 40 degrees after bottom. In that region, that's where we have really good airflow. And you can see through most of this region that we have a ton more area under the curve with the new camshaft than the old camshaft. For that day with that valve spring, we couldn't have run 800 lift if we wanted to. There wasn't an 800 lift spring. So we were just a little bit over 700 lift. We couldn't have run the acceleration rates at the valve back in 2000 that we can run today. The reason we couldn't is the push rods. That motor, what did it have, 3/8 or 5/16 push rods in it?
3/8.
3/8 push rods in it, had an aluminum rocker arm on it that was pretty flimsy. Today, you're going to have a much stiffer rocker arm. You'll have 7/16 push rods. It's going to be a lot stiffer system, so we can run more acceleration in there. So the new design with the new rocker arm lets us get a lot faster in this region. Peak piston velocity occurs here at about 70 degrees after top dead center. So here's where the piston is going fast as it can. Now this peak piston velocity doesn't mean that you have peak port velocity, because the port has, all the air mass in this port has momentum, that has mass, has to build up momentum. So as you start, the piston starts dropping away, the valve's chasing it, the piston starts outrunning it, all this volume is increasing, then you really start to move in the air. And so where this new camshaft really beats the old camshaft is it actually closes the valve earlier. So we're probably closing the valve about 10 to 15 degrees earlier. But if you look down here in this region from about 30 degrees before to 30 degrees after bottom dead center, you can see in this region we have almost 200 thousandths more lift at 30 before bottom dead center, and still more than 50 thousandths more lift at 30 degrees after bottom dead center. So while If you've ever turned an engine over by hand, when you turn over a stand, and you'll see the piston comes down real quick and it gets down to the bottom, and because of the rod and everything, it just looks like it camps out around bottom dead center. While the piston's camping in there, air is at high RPM, the air is just pouring into the engine. So if we can keep the door open in that region, then we can get more air in. But what we can't do while we're keeping the door open in here, we can't make this closing later, because if we move this closing out that way to get more air here, what happens is it tunes at a higher and higher RPM. So the new design, we have to look at where we want to open the valve, open in a controlled way, get the maximum area under the curve, get the maximum area on the backside, and then try to close it earlier, because we're not going to try to make a 10,000 RPM comp eliminator motor out of it. It's still going to operate in the same 8,000 RPM range.
Just 8,000.
Well, we're going to try to make a lot of power in that 6 to 8 range. You know, that should be its sweet spot. You know, when you close the intake valve over here, so this is the intake valve closing. So IVC is right here. If you close the intake later, it'll tune at higher RPM. As you close the intake earlier, it's lower RPM. So we can only close it at a certain, for a given cubic inch that it's trying to supply, a given port cross section. There's sort of a perfect intake closing for 1 RPM. If you go 1,000 RPM past there, it's closed too early. If you go 1,000 RPM below it, it's closing too late. And so what will happen is you'll fill in the chamber, you know, the port will fill in the cylinder, but if you close it too late, as the piston comes up, pressure will build and it'll start pushing air back into the port. If you close it too soon, you've got air trying to rush into the chamber, but you've slammed the door in its face. So that's why closing that intake, and that's why, you know, you can try to make a camshaft work at all RPM, but it doesn't really work. You know, Honda got around it with the VTEC by having a camshaft for low RPM, a camshaft for high RPM. Today, a lot of camshafts have phasers, so they actually chase that intake closing point by advancing the cam at low RPM, retarding at high RPM. But in a race application, for a 3,000 RPM window, we can do a pretty good job with 1 intake closing. We just have to choose it for the right setup. If you look at the exhaust, you can see, you know, so the load design difference, you know, today's load has a slower opening, it has a faster closing, has a lot higher velocity in this mid-range, a lot higher closing velocity in mid-range, has higher lift because of the new valve spring, you know, roughly 170 thousandths more lift. On the exhaust, you can see things haven't changed as much, you know.
Maybe your rent's due on Friday, but you forgot and you found a smoking deal on a junkyard 6-liter. Hindsight's 20/20 and you can't change the past. But what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash. And now you can, thanks to Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, fix your car, or catch up on bills. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download Dave today at dave.com/Stapleton. That's dave.com/Stapleton. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC.
Through the early part, we're actually very, very similar in how we open the valve. Then as the valve gets open, we start getting faster at it. We go more energy into it. This was probably designed for a 45-degree seat. And so if you look at lift to diameter and everything like that, going much more than 650 lift would have done bad things on the exhaust. Today, even though the exhaust valve isn't any bigger, most cylinder heads will be made with a 50 to 55-degree seat. They also have more tulip on the backside of the valve. So the new exhaust valve is in port, seat, the whole combination of the cylinder head is better optimized for higher lift. So what we'll wind up doing is running virtually the same lift on the exhaust. You can see here we're about 780 lift, 790 lift. You can see we're about 830. After lash, that'll be like in the 775 range, and this will be right at 800. So basically you can take the same spring, install it about 30 thousandths tighter, and run the same spring intake and exhaust. If you run 700 lift on the exhaust but 800 lift on the intake, you really need a different spring from intake to exhaust, but you can get by with 25 thousandths just install height. But you can see same opening rates, again faster, a lot more area under the curve. And you can see we have the faster closing here, but at the end we taper off a little bit. Now where you do see a big difference in the TDC lift, as you can see here at 10 before TDC, the old design only had 271 thousandths lift where that cursor was. The new design is 329 thousandths. So that is one place where we went and took advantage of the new design. He's making a new piston. Hey, Lake, get them to put a little bit deeper pocket on the exhaust for me. Since this was originally designed to be like a 9.5 to 1 piston, they'll make, who we have making the piston for this
CP.
So CP is going to design a great piston. This is about the same lift on both sides of TDC, about a 330 thousandths valve lift at 10 before and 10 after. Give them those numbers and they'll make the piston around it.
And even with those valve lift numbers around TDC, we can still have a 12-to-1 compression with a flat top piston. We don't have to put any kind of dome in there that changes flame speed and flame front and all that. So we can really still get a really good piston design with a lot more lift under area.
Yeah, and that's really the advantage. When you look at this generation NASCAR engine, where the Fords really had an advantage on the Chevys. If you look at an 18-degree Chevrolet from that region, look at a Ford C3. Here's a C3 head, right? C3 head. Airflow-wise, the Chevy was just as good as the Ford. But the Ford did better because they had a better combustion chamber at the time. They were getting better brake-specific fuel consumption, which just as a measure for every drop of fuel you put in the cylinder, how much power can you extract? Because they had a better burn rate, they used less time, they had a better burn rate, they had a nice compact chamber. They didn't move more air through the ports, but they got more power out of that same amount of air. So we're going to take advantage of what the C3 has with this new cam design, get more intake lift, make it for a new rocker arm, make it for a new valve spring, use some of the new low shock technology to have a little bit better intake load than we'd ever dreamed of at the time, and then go back and try to make something that's going to really wake this engine up and get the most power out of it today.
And the lifters are going to be the
wheel guided Jessels?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Actually, it's a Morel,
yeah.
but it's the Keyway style.
Keyway style.
Yeah, Keyway style. So it's actually a larger diameter wheel, so that actually helps it make that ramp even better.
Right, because when you're going up this ramp, the camshaft, you can imagine as the load comes and the wheel's hitting it, it's trying to push everything, push the lifter back, trying to move the camshaft around. The bigger wheel you can put it, the less pressure angle you have, the more force vector you have going straight up the push rod, just the less goofy stuff that happens. Because we'd love to say that the camshaft at 8,000 RPM is going 4,000 RPM the whole time. That's not true. As the valve is opening, that pushback slows down the cam, so it might instead of going 4,000 RPM, it might be going 3,800 RPM, might be going 3,600 RPM. And then it gets on the closing side, it kicks it back forward. And so instead of getting, this is static valve motion, no deflection, no twisting. As you make it go back and forward, these ramps get steeper and the energy into the spring gets greater. When you think about a cam design, every bit of energy that I put in the system, we talked about how a pro mod will launch. Well, you can imagine this is kind of like 0 to 100 to 0 and then back again. Because once we launch on the opening ramp, we're coming up here and all of this velocity is kinetic energy. All of the kinetic energy in this opening side, and the steeper we make this, the more the valve spring has to catch.
Right.
So all of the, you've got potential energy in the camshaft here, kinetic energy in the valve train here, and then potential energy in the valve spring here.
Going back.
Then the potential energy in the valve spring has to be released to create kinetic energy of the valve here, and then that goes back into potential energy of the camshaft there. So it's a big energy dance if you imagine it. And if anything starts deflecting, a push rod deflects, a rocker arm deflects, the valve, the cam itself starts getting pulled back and shot forward. All of that is more energy in the system. So the more we can control that, the closer we can get with our dynamic motion to our static motion.
If you get it wrong, and it looks like you tried to jump the shark up here, you get Evel Knievel Caesar's Palace landing down here. We call that valve bounce, and it's really bad. And that's what the Spintrons are great for.
Yeah, what happens here is you can imagine if we lose control here and come up.
If you think this was interesting, send it to one of your friends who you would think might think it was interesting too, because odds are the system that, you know, whatever suggests videos to people is probably not going to show this one to somebody. So it's up to you guys, you diehards, to help it grow. And we appreciate you for doing that.
Then it's going to go to coil bind, it's going to come across, and then it's going to shoot it back down, and it'll come back and it'll hit in this area. It'll deflect a little bit, and then it bounces back up and then comes back down. Well, with RPM, this node right here that we jokingly call a plumber's crack, it starts on this side and it works to this side. As this works all the way back to the bottom, it is totally out of control. The other thing is, this is when the spring is most stressed, is here over the nose. So if you have the crash when the spring is most stressed, you're going to take load out of it. And as you take load out of it, you won't be able to close it. You know, a lot of people go, hey, I'm going to open the valve really quickly, and then I'll put a slow closing ramp to make it happy. And that's sort of like going in there, if you ever imagine, would be really ticking off your wife and then trying to bring chocolates. You know, I've tried, there is not enough chocolate in the world to make an unhappy wife happy again. The best job is to start with the chocolates and then ask a little bit more on the back end of it. And that's what the low shock is. We're trying to hurt the spring less earlier so it can help us more later. Sorry for calculus. And
I'm just taking it all in. I think that makes a lot of sense.
well, it's just, you know, you look at this, you go, well, Billy, why didn't you do the red cams then? One, I didn't know how to do it then. I wasn't as good at my job in 2000 as I am in 2020. Two, these were done about 2020, but you get the idea. You know, one, we've learned how to do things better. Two, every part of the engine has gotten better. The valve spring's better than it was. The rocker arms are better. The lifter is better. The push rods are better. The cam core is better. Everything that we have in here. Surface finish better. The ability to grind it accurately has gotten better. Everything about this, you know, as each part gets better, you re-optimize the system around it. So that's why no matter how good we did today, if we all sat back down in 2044 and said, hey, let's do this again, what we'd see is dramatic differences. And what those are going to be, I couldn't tell you, because I don't know what valve springs are going to look like in 2044. I don't know what rocker arms will look like. But I do know that the camshaft will be better then than it is now.
So if someone hands you their cam specs, just like lift, duration, lobe center, that really doesn't tell you any of this, because these peak numbers are just 2 points in a three-dimensional picture.
Yeah, and we did that one time. We Scooter and I worked together, and we were doing something with, because people are talking about lift and duration, and we took two lobes and we took them we took two camshafts and we held these points constant. So we made all three of them have the exact, that both camshafts have the same, you know, 50 opening, peak lift number, 50 closing, 50 opening on the intake, peak lift, 50 closing. But they're very different lobe shapes. They had different symmetry, they had different area under the curve, everything like that. And there was more than 50 horsepower difference between the two. And we said, you know, here's the two cams. What do you guys think would be the difference? It was like at the Advanced Engineering Technology Conference, probably in the early 90s. And people were like, oh, 5 horsepower, oh, 10 horsepower. We showed them the dyno results, and literally with the same exact specs, you know, one camshaft was 50 horsepower better than the other. So, you know, it's not uncommon at all that just this duration at 50 in lift doesn't tell you the whole story. You know, it's all about opening rates, closing rates, how much area under the curve you have, how much area you can move in the system during that time, and is it stable? And one of the big things is if you try to push this area too high and you get it unstable, then you'll lose like the 50 horsepower or more. So, you know, you've got to keep it happy through the whole system.
I got to ask you a really, probably to you, stupid question that everybody watching this video is going to want to know is, how can I look at this chart and find out how hard it's going to thump?
He is the godfather of the thumper cam now.
Honestly, that's not as hard as you would think, because if you look at exhaust opening right here, this is the exhaust valve opening, EVO. The earlier you open the valve, the more energy is still left in the combustion chamber. That energy will be used to make sound. So the earlier you move this, the louder it's going to thump. But then the shape of this changes the tone. If you make this shape really fast, you'll have a high-pitched tone. you know, like a tinny, like a imagine a drum head. So the guy's a drummer, you have a small pop, pop, pop. If you slow it down, you'll get more of a thump. It'll be more of a blap, blap, blap. Imagine it's like a big bass drum instead of that. Then you have this area under the curve. So we look at this overlap area here, and this is the overlap area. When we look at the overlap duration, the overlap area, the more time these two are connected to each other, this is the only time your exhaust port gets to talk back to your intake port. So the header is talking to the intake port during this time. The header, however, is not set up to be tuned at idle. It's actually tuned usually around 5,000–6,000 RPM, maybe 3,500 on a real long, like a 32-inch header, maybe a little higher with like a 28-inch header. But in here, the pressure wave isn't timed at idle to work in here. So the more you increase this overlap area and the more you move this EVO, the more you get the sound of the thumper. So earlier exhaust valve opening with more overlap area, this will cause misfire. And this will cause the sound. So if you want something that sounds low frequency, really loud, with a lot of lope to it, you want this EVO moved earlier, slower, and then more overlap. But notice that one thing that I did talk about, IVC. The intake valve closing won't have anything to do with the sound. So I can put that intake valve closing where you need for your street application, increase the overlap area, change the exhaust opening, and I can tune the sound like you would with the stereo without really changing where you make peak power or where you make peak torque. That's the thumper camshafts, you know, that they sound really cool. They sound like they're a race cam, but they drive pretty decent, you know, and how you can do that is by tailoring each of those valve events, tailoring that exhaust valve opening and the overlap, but the IVC for the RPM that you're actually going to run.
Well, that is...
So you can look at that chart, and that's the best chart to look at to know what a camshaft's going to sound like.
See,
Oh,
that's
there
why
you
you
go.
had to come to Memphis, Tennessee.
Mic
right?
drop right there. That's
Right.
it.
This is why you come to Memphis, Tennessee, and you list Billy Godbold, you have a project, so you need to get stuff done.
There are no dumb questions here. So, there you go. We know this video was extremely tech-dense information. Like, probably 95% of people out there who are, heck, even subscribed to this channel, are gonna watch the first 30 seconds of this video and be like, oh, it's no noises, I'm gonna watch someone do a burnout. Click, and they're gone. The rest of you who watched this whole video, you got something going on up here, and we like you. That's for sure. If you thought this was interesting, leave a comment and say like what you thought the most interesting part was. Was it the thump instructions? Was it the ramp rates? Was it all of it? Because for the 20 minutes this video was, I was watching it again and it was captivating me again, and I sat there and I recorded it. Some things we film, I'm just like waiting for it to be over, and sometimes I'm getting back into the story. This was one of those times I was getting back into the story. So as always, if you would like to support the channel, check out StapletonAutoworks.com to find the shirts and stuff we're wearing. I'm wearing the Boom Tube one right now, and the Flex Fit hat. We got Flex Fit hats, we got snapback hats, we got stickers, all kinds of cool stuff. And we pack and ship it all right here. Logan's not here to do merch plug right now because she's getting her hair done. So it's just me doing a really bad job at it. Thanks for dealing with my suckiness. We'll see ya.